Rather than taking a risk on smaller, riskier, and more diverse projects, they tend to blow their load on whatever's popular right now.
Hi everyone, it's Blue. Make sure you like and subscribe and go follow me on my Kick and Twitch. Those links are down below. Also my Patreon, where I post more content on there that I don't post here.
Apparently, this is a universe where everyone has two heads. One happy, one sad.
Honey, have you seen Stewie? I can't find him anywhere.
Oh my god!
I sure have. He's over there playing in the corner.
I want you to know
Today, I'm going to be reacting to more Critical Drinker, why modern movies suck.
Now, you don't need me to tell you that modern Hollywood has got itself some problems. Whether it's ongoing strike action, declining artistic creativity, an over-reliance on remakes and tired genres that are past their peak, or a general aversion to doing anything particularly new or inventive. And to be fair, I've covered a lot of these problems in previous installments of this series, but one of the biggest overriding factors in all of this is a financial one. Put simply, movies are too damn expensive these days. The production budgets for mainstream Hollywood films have been steadily rising since the 1990s, but the process has accelerated out of control over the past few years. In fact, out of the 100 most expensive movies ever released, 66 of them were made in the past 10 years. But Drinker, you intoxicated bastion of common sense in a world gone mad, I hear you say, why is this a bad thing? If studios want to spend more money on their films, why not let them get on with it? Well, the thing is, this kind of approach to filmmaking creates problems. The kind of problems that cause a ripple effect through the entire industry, ultimately undermining the quality of the films that we get to watch. The first and most obvious of these problems is an economic one. As I explained during my Indiana Jones video, once you factor in promotional costs and distributors' fees, the average movie needs to make about 3 times its production budget just to break even. That's hard enough even for relatively small movies, but it becomes infinitely more difficult for films at the top end of the scale. Because if your movie happens to be one of the growing number that costs more than $300 million to make, then you're looking at close to $1 billion just to start turning a profit. Even now, there's not many films capable of reaching that milestone. Which brings me along to another problem, the cost of failure. See, the financial losses incurred by the studio begin to rise exponentially as the budget goes up. A $50 million flop is embarrassing to be sure, but a $300 million flop is absolutely disastrous. And the inevitable result of massive amounts of money being at stake is that studios tend to seek out safety, predictability, and proven track records. Rather than taking a risk on smaller, riskier, and more diverse projects, they tend to blow their load on whatever's popular right now. And up until recently, that meant either big budget effects heavy superhero flicks, big budget effects heavy resurrections of old franchises, or big budget effects heavy remakes of classic films from previous decades. Spot the common factor here? There seems to be a real mentality in Hollywood now that bigger and louder somehow equals better, and the result is an endless competition to produce the most visually stunning pieces of cinema possible. But the problem is that the more you
I'm actually going to stop here because I feel like he's given so much information that it would be hard to comment on if I waited any longer. Especially since I learned so much already. I didn't know really like the average budget for movies. I didn't realize it's 66 of, I think he said 100 of the most expensive movies in all time. 66 of them were in the last 10 years. That's crazy. And I do know that as time goes on, everything gets more expensive because people, that's just how probably everything works. But with this, since it's such a risk in the first place, it's how people are getting paid. It's how you pay back the things that you borrowed in order to make the movie in the first place. And then you don't get any of that money back because it flops. That's really crazy. You spent $300 million. Like, especially for the movies that are even more, or even if they're less than that, and it flops, it's embarrassing. And that kind of just makes people not necessarily maybe learn the lesson that would be pushed, which in his case, it seems like he's saying, stop doing super flashy, expensive movies. Just go for something that might not only be a little bit more budget friendly, but I don't know, something unique or creative. Like, don't remake something again. But no, they take almost like the opposite advice of, well, if we're going to spend all of this money, maybe we can make up for it by doing something that we know is going to pay off. No, don't remake. We don't want to see another remake of everything. And you changed it just enough for us to question, I'm sorry, why is this called that? Because you changed like the most important aspects of this movie to make it like be what that movie was. But then you took them away and then still called it that movie, so we're like lured into going to go see it.
But the problem is that the more you focus on the visuals of your film, the more you tend to neglect everything else around it. These days there's an over-reliance on spectacle and scale to draw audiences in, and it ends up becoming a crutch for bad writing and lack of creativity. I mean, you can't honestly tell me that you were gripped by Avatar 2's compelling and complex storyline. Jesus, if you can even remember a single thing that actually happened in that movie, I'll be impressed.
Hey,
What you end up with
do.
instead are a series of beautiful but ultimately empty and meaningless tech demos that keep you momentarily distracted but offer no long-term impact or emotional payoff. They stimulate your eyes but not your brain, and the more it happens, the more audiences start to become jaded and disinterested in what Hollywood has to offer. Another big problem with so much money at stake is studio interference. I've lost track of the number of films that have been derailed and ruined because the studio started to get jittery about the filmmaker's creative vision and decided to stick their oar in with endless test screenings, last-minute rewrites and mandatory reshoots to produce something more commercially viable. Again, it's a nice idea in theory, but the problem is that studio executives aren't storytellers, they're money men, and the decisions they make tend to be driven by whatever they think will generate the most money. Narrative cohesion and creative integrity don't tend to factor into their thinking, because all that really matters is keeping the shareholders happy. Not only do rewrites and reshoots undermine a filmmaker's creative vision, but they also push the film's production budget even higher, making it even more difficult to turn up profits. So what do you do when movies cost a shit ton of money to make and your confidence in new projects is at an all-time low? Well, you resurrect dusty old franchises with inbuilt fan bases and strong name recognition and hope that it'll somehow translate into financial success. Why do you think we've seen so many new Star Trek, Star Wars, Terminator, Indiana Jones and Ghostbusters movies in recent years? Not to mention Disney's endless cannibalization of their classic animated films.
gross.
It's because all of those things have been big hits at some point in the past, and so logically if you can shit out a lazy cash grab remake or unnecessary sequel, then it'll be equally successful, right?
Wrong.
The
That's a
top
good-
10 movies so far this year, 7 of them are either sequels or remakes of older films. And the thing is, it didn't always used to be this way. Go back in time 20 years and the biggest films of 2003 were Return of the King, Pirates of the Caribbean, Finding Nemo and Bruce Almighty. Jump back 30 years and Jurassic Park, The Fugitive, The Firm, Sleepless in Seattle and Mrs. Doubtfire ruled the box office. I mean, I know which movies I find more worthy of my time. There's also a rather predictable tendency to follow the crowd at the top levels of Hollywood, leeching off winning formulas to replicate the successes of others rather than taking the risk of inventing your own. I know it's become popular to shit
Ugh, sound like reactors. I'm just joking. No, that's also a pattern that you can see. Even movies that aren't necessarily remakes, you can just kind of see other people. Like, okay, these 3 movies that all came out within 5 years, they almost even have the same scenes. Like, they're all standing at the end in a line. There's literally 5 people. Like, the scenes are starting to blend in and look the same. And I'll also point out, as he's clearly pointing out, not like it's an original thought, but just to kind of double down on it, there's a lot of superhero clips in here, and I actually am one that kind of enjoys, like, a lot of superhero movies, but I do think that it's fair to say, hey, for those of you who actually enjoy the movies, and then for those of you who have always had this opinion, I think there's a good compromise, like middle ground that everybody can agree on, whether you liked them or never liked them. There's a point where they got worse. There's a point where they got extremely worse. It was just repeats of the old ones that they've done, and all of the characters even felt the same. Nothing felt original. Everything is literally just like explosives and a lot of money shoved into it. And then you are questioning halfway through the movie, like, what's the point?
I know it's become popular to shit on the MCU nowadays, but in its prime, it absolutely changed the landscape of modern blockbuster movies to the point where almost everyone adopted the exact same style and tone. Serious, mature, and thought-provoking storytelling was out, and snarky, ironic, self-deprecating humor was in. How many movies over the past 10 years can you think of where characters stop every couple of minutes to make another lame attempt at a Joss Whedon joke? It's because everyone wanted their movie to be the next Avengers. The result result
so
of all
good
these
for the
different factors
first
is a kind of creative inertia, a feeling of bland, depressing sameness. You get the sense that most big budget movies nowadays all rolled off the same assembly line, composed of the same basic ingredients with only minor alterations. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that we seem to have reached the maximum upward limit of how big and expensive movies can possibly be, beyond which it becomes impossible to even turn a profit. And maybe it might be time for studios to start backing down a little, stop risking everything on one mega project that has to appeal to as many people as possible, and start investing their money in a more diverse range of smaller, cheaper, creatively ambitious films with a lower bar for success. Projects where the filmmakers actually get the creative freedom they need to bring their visions to life without constant interference, where they can afford to take risks and try out new ideas without the fear that one single failure could bring down the entire studio. And to be honest, I think we could all benefit from a bit more variety in our summer movie season. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
I like his ending. I have a few things to say. One of the ones that I actually forgot before the last pause was I the only one who kind of liked Avatar too? Clearly the problem is that we waited so long for that movie.
Right.
But I do hope the smaller studios that are more okay with maybe, I'd be happy with 10 million, and then maybe you can even come out with more movies, because they don't take nearly as long for the CGI, special effects, you don't need nearly as big of a team, you don't need years to work on, I don't know, all the different scenes for Avatar, just for the audience to be disappointed in the first place. I do think that there's a lot more to say about this video, but he honestly kind of said most of it himself, and I don't want to just repeat thoughts. But yeah, if you have any of your own, you can just let me know down in the comments below. I do hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Again, this is Critical Thinker, so go check out his original video on YouTube, and go check out all my links if you haven't already, and I'll see you all next time.